This is a true story, and the HOA has long been a thorn in the side of the residents. Here's the full story.
Willow Creek Estates prided itself on its pristine appearance. Manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, houses painted in approved palettes of muted earth tones. It was a symphony of suburban conformity. At the heart of this carefully curated world stood the Homeowners Association, and at the heart of the HOA's power stood Agnes Periwinkle. Agnes was a woman sculpted from rules and reinforced by self-importance. Her severe bob haircut seemed as perfectly trimmed as her prize-winning rose bushes, and her posture suggested a spine forged from the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS. Agnes didn't just interpret the rules, she embodied them, enforced them, and expanded upon them in her mind. She was the neighborhood's self-appointed sentinel, her days spent gazing out from behind her spotless windows, binoculars often in hand, scanning for any deviation from the established order. A blade of grass too long, a garbage can left out hours past pickup, a child's misplaced toy, nothing escaped the vigilant eye of Agnes Periwinkle. Her communications, often delivered via sternly worded emails or official-looking notice letters slipped into mailboxes, were legendary for their passive aggression and unwavering tone of authority. Other residents, weary of confrontation or genuinely afraid of her influence on the HOA board, typically capitulated to her demands, fostering a climate of quiet compliance that Agnes mistook for universal respect. Into this world of enforced tranquility moved Sergeant Major Thomas Jenkins, Ret. Tom was everything Willow Creek Estates was not, a little worn around the edges, carrying the quiet weight of a life lived far from manicured lawns and HOA meetings. He was a man who had faced sandstorms and hostile fire, not debates over bird feeder heights. He had seen the stark reality of conflict and sacrifice, which made the trivial concerns of suburban life seem almost absurd. Tom had served his country for over 20 years, a distinguished career that had taken him to places most residents of Willow Creek only saw on cable news. He had returned from his final deployment not to a parade, but to a quiet hospital room, having lost his left leg above the knee to an IED. Retirement, he decided, would be about finding peace, stability, and a place where his service dog, a calm, intelligent golden retriever named Buddy, could nap in sunbeams without complaint. He chose the modest single-story home on Primrose Lane specifically for its lack of stairs and its small, manageable yard. It felt safe, predictable, a stark contrast to the unpredictability of his past. Moving in was a quiet affair. A few boxes, some sturdy, unpretentious furniture, and Buddy, always close by. Tom navigated his new home with the practiced ease of someone who had adapted to profound change. His prosthetic leg was a part of him, functional and often hidden beneath practical trousers, but a visible reminder of his sacrifice nonetheless. He also had a simple, sturdy ramp installed leading to his front door, a necessary modification that blended as best as possible with the home's existing structure but was, undeniably, different. His first encounter with Agnes was brief and, in hindsight, ominous. A few days after moving in, as he was carefully placing his trash can at the curb on collection day, he saw her approaching from her perfectly manicured property 2 doors down. She didn't wave warmly or offer a neighborly greeting. Instead, she stopped a few feet away, hands clasped tightly in front of her, and her gaze fixed not on his face, but on the ramp. "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "I'm Agnes Periwinkle, head of the Architectural Review Committee. I noticed your alteration to the front of your property. Was that modification submitted for approval?" Tom, taken aback by the immediate focus on the ramp rather than a simple welcome, managed a polite smile. "Oh, hello. Thomas Jenkins. Just moved in. The ramp? Yes, it's a necessary accessibility modification." Agnes's eyes narrowed slightly. Necessary or not, all external modifications require prior committee approval to ensure aesthetic consistency with the community standards. You do have a copy of the CC and RS, I presume? It's all clearly laid out in Section 4, subsection B. Tom felt a flicker of annoyance, but suppressed it. He was tired of conflict. "I just got the keys last week, Ms. Periwinkle. I haven't had a chance to read through everything yet." I assumed something like this, related to a disability, would be exempt or easily approved. Agnes drew herself up taller. Assumptions are not a substitute for following procedure, Mr. Jenkins. The rules apply to everyone. I'll need you to submit the plans for that ramp retrospectively. There may be fines involved for unauthorized modifications. She didn't wait for a response, simply turned and walked back towards her home, leaving Tom standing by his trash can, the warm glow of anticipated peaceful retirement suddenly feeling a little cooler. Buddy, sensing his master's shift in mood, nudged his hand gently. Tom patted the dog's head. "Looks like we've met the welcoming committee, Bud," he murmured. He didn't know it then, but this was just the opening skirmish in a battle he hadn't anticipated fighting. The retrospective submission for the ramp was, predictably, met with bureaucratic resistance orchestrated by Agnes. She requested detailed drawings, material specifications, and even a justification for its permanent fixture status, despite its obvious purpose. Tom, gritting his teeth, provided everything, including a polite note explaining his disability and the ramp's necessity for him to simply enter and exit his home. The process dragged on, punctuated by curt emails from Agnes questioning minor details. But the ramp was just the beginning. Agnes seemed to develop a singular focus on Tom's property and lifestyle. It started with small things. A notice slipped into his mailbox about a single fallen leaf on his pristine sidewalk, which he had already swept. An email regarding Buddy's excessive barking, a claim Tom knew was false, as Buddy was remarkably quiet, trained not to bark unless necessary. Then came the complaints that felt more pointed, more personal, clearly aimed at his disability and his service dog. A formal warning about non-standard landscaping because he had a small, clearly marked area where Buddy could relieve himself. A notice citing a violation for unapproved decorative items because Buddy's water bowl was left outside near the back patio door. These were not issues other residents faced. Children's toys littered some yards, and various pet items were visible on other properties without comment. It was clear Tom was being singled out. Tom tried to address the issues calmly. He responded to emails politely, explaining the nature of a service dog, the necessity of the relief area, the temporary nature of the water bowl. He even tried talking to Agnes directly when he saw her outside. "Ms. Periwinkle," he'd say, attempting a friendly tone, "about these notices." Agnes would cut him off with a dismissive wave or a sharp, "Mr. Jenkins, if you have concerns, please submit them in writing through the proper channels. The rules are in place for a reason, and they apply to everyone. We can't have exceptions, can we? It would set a terrible precedent." The implication, hanging heavy in the air, was that his needs, his disability, were the potential terrible precedent. The fines started arriving. A $50 fine for the landscaping violation. A $75 fine for the unapproved decorative item. Tom felt a mix of disbelief and rising anger. He was being penalized for simply living in a way that accommodated his physical needs and his service dog's requirements. He began to notice Agnes's car parked on the street at odd hours, seemingly watching his house. He'd see her curtains twitch as he left for appointments. Neighbors averted their eyes when he mentioned the issues, mumbling about not wanting to get involved or Agnes can be difficult. One evening, as he was carefully transferring groceries from his car to the ramp, Agnes appeared at the edge of her property. "Mr. Jenkins," she called, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet street, "you should be mindful of leaving your vehicle parked by the curb for extended periods. Section 7, subsection C of the CC and RS prohibits it, impedes traffic flow, and is unsightly." Tom had been parked for less than 10 minutes, directly in front of his own house, needing the close proximity due to his mobility issues and the heavy bags. The street was wide, with ample room for other vehicles to pass. This wasn't about rules, it was about harassment. He straightened up, leaning slightly on his crutches, which he used for shorter distances around the car. His face, usually open and friendly, was set. "Ms. Periwinkle," he said, his voice low but clear, "I'm unloading my groceries. I'll move the car as soon as I'm done. As you can see, it takes me a little longer than most people." Agnes gave a tight, unpleasant smile. Perhaps you should plan better, Mr. Jenkins. The rules are quite clear. Extended parking is not permitted. Extended parking, Tom repeated, his patience wearing thin, or parking at all when Agnes Periwinkle decides she doesn't like it. Her smile vanished. Your tone is inappropriate, Mr. Jenkins. I am simply upholding the standards of the community. You chose to live here, you must abide by the rules. If you find that difficult, perhaps you should have considered a different type of community. The implication was unmistakable, a community that didn't have rules, or perhaps, a community that accommodated people like him. It was a direct jab at his disability. Tom stood there, the weight of the groceries momentarily forgotten. He looked at Agnes, at her rigid posture, her cold eyes, and he saw not a guardian of community standards, but a petty tyrant using her limited power to make someone else's life difficult. He had faced down armed insurgents with more grace than this woman possessed. He didn't respond to her jab. He simply turned back to his car, his jaw tight, and continued unloading his groceries, slower now, each movement a silent act of defiance. Agnes remained standing at her property line for a moment longer before huffing and retreating into her fortress. That night, sitting in his living room, Buddy asleep at his feet, Tom looked at the stack of HOA notices and fines. The initial frustration had solidified into something harder. He had served his country, faced life-altering injury, and navigated the difficult path back to civilian life. He wasn't going to let some neighborhood bully, armed with a rule book and a pair of binoculars, drive him out or make him miserable in his own home. He hadn't survived deployments just to be defeated by Agnes Periwinkle. He picked up the CC&RS he had finally retrieved and started reading, not just the sections Agnes quoted, but all of them. He read about the architectural review process, the dispute resolution procedures, the rules regarding service animals, which were protected under federal law, something Agnes seemed to conveniently ignore or be ignorant of, and the rights of residents. He also started documenting everything. Every interaction, every notice, every fine, every instance of her watching him. He took photos, kept emails, and started a detailed log. He was done trying to reason. It was time to prepare for battle. This wasn't just about a ramp or a water bowl anymore, it was about dignity, about the right to live in peace, and about pushing back against someone who wielded rules as weapons against the vulnerable. Tom knew he couldn't fight the HOA machine, which Agnes largely controlled, by himself. He needed information and potentially, allies. He started by quietly talking to a few neighbors who seemed less under Agnes's sway. He spoke to Mrs. Rodriguez next door, a kind elderly woman who often offered a wave and a smile. When he cautiously brought up the HOA issues, her smile faded. "Oh, Agnes," she sighed. "She makes everyone's life difficult. My nephew wanted to put up a small flagpole for his scout project, perfectly within regulations, but she held it up for months over some minor detail. People just give in. It's easier." Tom also spoke to Mr. Henderson, a retired accountant who lived across the street and served on the HOA board, though he rarely spoke up at meetings. Mr. Henderson listened intently as Tom described the escalating complaints and fines, particularly those related to his ramp and service dog. "She's using the rules against you, Thomas," Mr. Henderson said, shaking his head. "Twisting them. The ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and Fair Housing Act provisions regarding reasonable accommodations and service animals override many of these local HOA rules. And harassment, even under the guise of enforcement, is not permitted. We've had complaints about her behavior before, but never this persistent, this targeted." Mr. Henderson agreed to help Tom navigate the official HOA procedures and bylaws, explaining how meetings were run, how issues were voted on, and the process for bringing a formal complaint against a board member. He revealed that Agnes ruled the board through intimidation, others were either afraid of her or simply didn't want the hassle of opposing her. Armed with information and a growing sense of purpose, Tom decided his best course of action was not quiet negotiation, but a public confrontation at the next scheduled HOA meeting. He would use the platform to expose Agnes's behavior, not just as overzealous rule enforcement, but as targeted bullying and discrimination. He spent days meticulously organizing his evidence, copies of every notice and fine, emails, a timeline of events, photos of Agnes seemingly observing his property. He researched HOA case law regarding disability accommodations and service animals, highlighting the sections that superseded local covenants. He practiced what he would say, determined to remain calm and factual, letting the weight of the evidence speak for itself. Buddy was always nearby, a silent, supportive presence. He also wrote a formal request to be added to the agenda for the upcoming meeting, detailing his intent to discuss pattern of targeted harassment and discriminatory practices by a board member against a resident with a disability and their service animal. Submitting that letter felt like crossing a Rubicon. News of Tom's agenda item spread through the neighborhood grapevine, creating a buzz of anticipation and unease. Some residents whispered their support to Tom, others eyed him nervously, unsure of the potential fallout. Agnes, informed of the agenda item, responded with an icy email to the board, copied to Tom, dismissing his claims as baseless accusations from a resident unwilling to follow established community standards and reiterating her commitment to fair and consistent enforcement. Her tone suggested she was utterly confident in her position and expected to easily quash his complaint. The night of the HOA meeting arrived. It was held in the community clubhouse, a room usually filled with polite, if somewhat bored, residents. Tonight, however, the air was thick with tension. More people than usual were in attendance, drawn by curiosity and the unspoken drama surrounding Tom and Agnes. Agnes sat at the head of the table, flanked by the other board members, her expression one of stern composure. She tapped a pen impatiently on her notepad. Tom arrived, walking steadily on his prosthetic leg, Buddy by his side, wearing his official service vest. He carried a worn briefcase containing his carefully prepared materials. He nodded politely to neighbors as he found a seat towards the front. The meeting proceeded through the usual formalities, approval of minutes, treasurer's report. Agnes ran the meeting with her usual crisp efficiency, her voice cutting through the silence. Then, she arrived at the agenda item she had dreaded. Now, she announced, scanning the room, her eyes resting briefly and coldly on Tom, we come to the item requested by Mr. Thomas Jenkins regarding perceived issues with board conduct. She made it sound utterly trivial. Mr. Jenkins, you have 10 minutes. Tom stood up, placing his briefcase on the chair. Buddy lay down quietly at his feet. All eyes were on him. He didn't appear angry or emotional, he was simply a man stating facts. Thank you, Ms. Periwinkle. Members of the board, neighbors, Tom began, his voice clear and steady, projecting confidence he hadn't felt in months. I moved to Willow Creek Estates seeking a peaceful place to retire after serving 20 years in the United States Army. I sustained an injury in service, which resulted in the loss of my leg. My service dog, Buddy, is a trained and certified service animal. He paused, looking directly at Agnes. Since moving in, I have been subjected to a relentless and targeted campaign of harassment by Ms. Periwinkle, using her position on the HOA board. A ripple of murmuring went through the room. Agnes's face tightened, but she held her pose of detached authority. It began with my necessary accessibility ramp, Tom continued, opening his briefcase and pulling out a stack of papers. Despite explaining its purpose, I was subjected to undue scrutiny and threats of fines. He laid down the copies of the correspondence. Then came the baseless complaints, about my lawn, about Buddy's non-existent barking, about trivial items on my property. He showed the notices and fine letters. These were not applied equitably, other residents with similar situations were not targeted. He then focused on the more egregious complaints. Ms. Periwinkle has issued fines and warnings directly related to my disability and my service animal. Penalizing a small, designated relief area for a service dog, citing a water bowl as an unapproved decorative item, these actions are not only petty, they are discriminatory. They violate the spirit, and I believe the letter, of federal laws designed to protect individuals with disabilities and their service animals. He pulled out photos. I also have documented instances of what appears to be surveillance, he said, showing pictures he had taken from his window of Agnes's car parked outside his house or of her watching him. Combined with the pattern of complaints, this constitutes harassment. Tom took a breath, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the room. I served this country, I bore true arms, and I lost a part of myself fighting for the freedoms we all share. To come home and be persecuted in my own neighborhood, in my own home, by someone using bureaucratic power over matters of basic dignity and necessity, is frankly appalling. He looked back at Agnes. Ms. Periwinkle, you have used your position to bully and harass me because I am a veteran with a visible disability who requires reasonable accommodations. You have shown a complete lack of empathy and a disturbing willingness to weaponize the rules against someone you perceive as different or inconvenient. Agnes finally broke her silence, leaning into the microphone. Mr. Jenkins, these are slanderous accusations. I have simply been enforcing the rules that you agreed to follow when you purchased your property. Your situation does not exempt you from community standards. Her voice was shaking slightly, losing its cool composure. My situation, Tom repeated, his voice rising slightly, the years of military command echoing in the room, is the result of defending the very values that allow you to sit here tonight and abuse your authority. The law does provide for reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. Your refusal to acknowledge that, your insistence on penalizing me for things directly related to my needs, is a violation of those principles. He looked at the other board members. Have you reviewed the documentation? Have you considered the implications of these fines? Are we a community that supports its residents, including its veterans and those with disabilities, or are we a petty fiefdom ruled by personal vendettas disguised as rule enforcement? Then, something remarkable happened. Mr. Henderson, the quiet accountant, spoke up. Thomas is correct. I have reviewed the complaints and the relevant statutes. The actions taken against Mr. Jenkins regarding his ramp, his service dog's necessary facilities, and even the parking situation while unloading essential items appear to be discriminatory and likely illegal under federal law. The board has a responsibility to act in good faith and cannot enforce covenants in a manner that violates federal law or constitutes harassment. Ms. Periwinkle's behavior, as documented here, is unacceptable and puts the entire association at legal risk. Another resident, Mrs. Gable, who had witnessed several of Agnes's interactions, raised her hand. I've seen how Agnes treats Mr. Jenkins. It's not just enforcing rules, it's personal. She seems to take pleasure in making things difficult for him. Other murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. People who had long been silent were finding their voices. Agnes was visibly rattled. Her face was red, her hands gripping the edge of the table. This is an outrage. A conspiracy. I have done nothing but uphold the rules. He is trying to play the victim because he doesn't want to comply. Compliance isn't the issue, Ms. Periwinkle, Tom said calmly. Harassment and discrimination are. The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. The quiet compliance that had shielded Agnes for so long had evaporated, replaced by a collective realization of her abusive behavior and a surge of support for the veteran who had the courage to challenge her. A motion was made from the floor, not about Tom's complaints, but about Agnes's conduct. I move that the board investigate Ms. Periwinkle's actions for potential violations of the HOA's Code of Conduct and Discrimination policies, and that she be temporarily suspended from her duties pending the outcome. The motion was seconded. Agnes sputtered, "You can't. I'm the head. This is improper procedure." But the rules she so adored were now being used against her. The process was proper. A vote was called. The other board members, no longer willing to be complicit or risk legal action, voted unanimously in favor of the investigation and suspension. The residents in the audience added their resounding ayes in a non-binding show of support that left no doubt about the community's sentiment. Defeated and humiliated, Agnes stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. "This is not over," she hissed, glaring at Tom and the board, before storming out of the clubhouse, the picture of a tyrant dethroned. In the weeks that followed the dramatic HOA meeting, the atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates slowly but surely began to change. Agnes Periwinkle resigned from the board in disgrace and became a pariah in the neighborhood she had once ruled. Her house, once the symbol of HOA power, now seemed like a fortress under siege, its windows remaining resolutely shut, its perfectly manicured lawn an ironic testament to her obsessive control. The new interim HOA leadership, guided by Mr. Henderson, quickly reviewed Tom's case. The fines were immediately rescinded, accompanied by a formal letter of apology from the association for the unwarranted distress and harassment he had endured. The ramp was officially approved, not just as a necessary modification, but as a recognized part of his property, the result of a simple form rather than a battle. More importantly, the community felt different. The fear Agnes had instilled began to dissipate. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak to Tom before now stopped to chat, offering genuine apologies for not stepping in sooner. Children, no longer hurried past his house by cautious parents, would sometimes wave. Buddy became a popular figure, receiving pats and hellos on their walks. Tom's life on Primrose Lane settled into the peace he had so desperately sought. He could park his car and unload groceries without fear of reprimand. Buddy could enjoy his small, designated area without causing a neighborhood incident. The ramp, once a source of contention, was simply the way he got into his house. He attended subsequent HOA meetings, not with complaints, but as a respected member of the community. He didn't seek a position on the board, content with his quiet retirement, but his presence served as a reminder of what had happened and a safeguard against the re-emergence of petty tyranny. One sunny afternoon, Tom sat on his small front porch, Buddy resting his head on his knee. He watched a group of children playing down the street, heard the distant sound of a lawnmower, a little louder than Agnes would have allowed, he thought with a smile, and felt a profound sense of belonging. The battle had been difficult, draining, and at times, disheartening. But he had stood his ground, not with weapons, but with truth and perseverance, and he had won. He had not only secured his own peace but had, perhaps, made Willow Creek Estates a slightly better, more compassionate place for everyone. The perfect facades remained, but behind them, the human element, the messy, imperfect, yet ultimately decent spirit of community, had reasserted itself. He had found his peaceful retirement, hard-won, and deeply appreciated. This story is a fictional account, but the themes it explores are very real. It reminds us that bullying takes many forms, it isn't always physical. Abuse of power, harassment, and using rules to control or harm others are insidious forms of bullying that can make someone's life a misery. Rules should serve people, not the other way around. While community standards are important, they should never be wielded as weapons, particularly against those who are vulnerable or require reasonable accommodations. True community values prioritize empathy and support over rigid, unthinking enforcement. Standing up matters. It takes courage to challenge someone who is abusing their power, especially when they are entrenched. But silence in the face of injustice allows it to flourish. The actions of one brave individual, supported by those who eventually find their voice, can make a profound difference. Community responsibility. It's easy to look away, to not get involved. But allowing someone to be harassed or discriminated against diminishes the entire community. Being a good neighbor means standing up for what is right, even when it's difficult. Respect for service and difference, our veterans, and individuals with disabilities, deserve not just our respect, but our active support and understanding. Their experiences, their sacrifices, and their needs should be met with compassion, not bureaucratic obstacles or petty prejudice. May we all strive to build communities where empathy prevails over ego, where rules are applied with fairness and common sense, and where every resident, regardless of their background or challenges, can truly feel at home.